Gaby.
Ale,
How are you? ¿Cómo estás?
muy bien, gracias, hermana. ¿Y tú?
Muy bien, gracias. What a honor to have you here in my UMICHile conversations of this pandemic time.
I am so pleased to be connected with you again. It feels like no time has passed. My goodness, we were in school in the 90s. Somos abuelitas now, you know, we're really been
It's
20
true.
years. But it wasn't 20 years since the last time we saw each other. You've been to California. Yeah, you stayed with me
Yeah.
a few days, I remember. Yeah.
I was trying to remember the year. I think maybe it had been 2008.
I was just going to say it was either 2008 or 9
Yeah.
because I had been there for a couple of years. This is when I was in Berkeley. I had a cute little apartment, a little small one, but I felt like such a grown up because it was the first time that I had a 2-bedroom. It was the same size of my 1-bedroom, but it just made the bathroom smaller. And it was the first time around then, I was in my mid 30s, when I could have a room just for composing. It wasn't like also my bedroom or also my living room, and I could shut the door at night and really try and organize, my life, which I think that kind of balancing game is so difficult for artists. But yeah, so it was been about 2008 or so.
2008. And I think I
Yes, it
was
was.
going.
I remember what I was working on. When you came
Okay.
visited, I was under deadline, and I remember the piece. It was a vocal work. Yeah, so that was 2008. Yeah,
Yeah, and I was remembering that I was on my way to Cabrillo Festival.
that's right.
Yeah, so that was 2008. Well, it's so great to see you again, Gabby, and
Yeah.
all these memories come back to me as I talk to you. No, it's
Yeah,
wonderful.
same here. And that was stateside. Then the next time we saw each other was 2011 or 12, was in Ecuador.
You are right.
And that's when we worked with the
It's,
Orquesta de Instrumentos Andinos in Quito.
sí.
Yeah, and there was a PBS documentary made about our time, this grand experiment to try and write a large ensemble work for just native instruments, the panpipes and the quinas and charangos. That was incredible. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean
Compadre Washayo.
that was really an amazing experience for me too, no, because
Mm-hmm.
coming from a country uh, from the Andes, no, and there were many instruments that in a way they were new to me also, no. So it's incredible how the diversity of sounds
Yeah.
come from this part of the world, no.
Yeah. And, one of the first things that really amazed me was when when I was presented with a video by a young woman, a violinist from Ecuador, and she had wanted to convince me, to try and work with the orchestra, and I wasn't sure. I felt like I was very busy, and I was really focused on just going to Peru, where my mom is from, and and as I was digging around a little bit, I found this little video of this little cohort of panpipe players, and they got up there. The panpipes looked a little different. I didn't really take a good look, immediately, but they put the panpipes to their lips, and when I what I heard was "Toot toot toot toot, toot 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 toot," and I was like, "Oh my god!" And it was like like this, and then I could see that the instruments were constructed differently. And then later, when we went to Quito, we found they were making instruments that were more chromatic, so that they could play all of these more Western harmonies, the diatonic scale, and to play sometimes in the original key. And that kind of ingenuity from the other side of the algorithm for me, coming in from the Western angle and then seeing it from their angle so that we could meet somewhere in the middle, was really transformative for me and my own work, but also to recognize these colleagues working on these same questions of that you and I were talking about in grad school, about what it means to be of multiple heritages, to to try and bring that into our life's work in a personal but also professional way. But that
Yeah,
was the last time we saw each other, was working with musicians, also thinking about those questions.
absolutely. And I remember you mentioning to me while we were in Ecuador, this idea of that you had of creating a language, like a written musical language that they could and they can understand, but also that you can keep in time, no? So if
Mm-hmm.
this work is played by another orchestra of instrumentos andinos, they will understand the language, no?
Yeah, and it's evolving, because when I worked with several of those musicians later, with colleagues of ours like Kateri Ervama
Mhm.
and Andy Jennings over in Michigan, Kateri managed to steward a bunch of grants from our alma mater, University of Michigan, in 2014 to bring 3 of those musicians to Ann Arbor. And another documentary by the same filmmaker was made about that experiment. And we took that notation question to the next level. And I learned things like, we composers are so careful about assigning notes to which player. So it's not like I just give you guys a piano reduction of a string quartet and you figure out in the chord who's going to play what and do it. Everybody has their part really extracted and laid out very clearly. Well, these guys, because they hawk it so much, they divide up the same melody line. They said, it's actually easier for us if you just put the melody in one line and we'll figure it out. Don't divide it up. And I was like, what? I would be shot if I handed my players anything like that, where they had to just go in and parse it out from 1 or 2 lines. And so there is a lot that I learned even more in that trip, just working with a smaller group of musicians and pieces with smaller forces.
Mhm.
Yeah, that was another amazing step. You were supposed to be part of that. I remember
Yes, yeah, I
we
remember.
ran into visa issues, not with you, but with some of the other players, and we had to reschedule it, and it conflicted with your schedule. I
Yeah,
remember.
yeah. And Gabi, one of the scenes of this documentary, I remember seeing your mom, your mother, uh, drawing the instruments. Could you explain me that? Like
Yeah.
in a way you wanted to learn how the instrument works, right?
Well, you remember Ale, I played on your recital. I was your pianist, so I'm a very instrument oriented composer, and so it's easier for me, even if it's rudimentary, that I have some sense of how the instrument works.
Mhm.
And back in the day, I played violin for about 2 or 3 years in a public school program. I was terrible. Piano already messed me up to not have to work on being in tune and to sound good right away. So I didn't have the patience for it. I don't think I even ever got out of first position. But um, the idea, those instruments she was drawing were all guitar-like instruments. So the idea of changing your pitch with your left hand was something that was not totally foreign, but all the positionings were completely different. So what she did was she had laid down, she brought with her from the States tracing paper. And my mother's a wonderful artist, so things like this she can do really well. And she was just tracing the strings, and then she got all the frets, right? And then I went in and put in all the notes. And later, when I got back to the States, I transferred that to really heavy stock paper, and my mom inked it. And I use it when I'm composing. I can just put my, almost like a cellist. I can just kind of figure out what are basic positions that are going to work, and trying to expand what I can do to the nth power. So if I can do this, that means the guitars can do this. They can do a lot more. Um, and then she was taking really close videos of how their fingers were working. Like if I can get ideas just by seeing it and then paraphrase it. So I don't have to nuance every single technique, but if I can paraphrase and get in the ballpark, from there I can work with the player, which lends itself better to chamber music than orchestra music. It's a lot easier sometimes to experiment in chamber music. You work closely with the players, and that's always been my modus operandi in school. I did a lot of that with my schoolmates at Rice as well, and then at Michigan, and those are the people that I often continue to work with today. But I have all of those. I have maybe nine different tracings she's done of different guitar-like instruments. There are things I had never heard of. They had like in that orchestra, they had a Colombian tiple player, I remember,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
um,
There was a
a lot
name
of
of a guitar that I don't recall now, but
where there was a cuatro, Venezolano cuatro, and then there was something else that was kind of similar to a cuatro, and there was a tiple, which I think is from Colombia. There were the two types of charangos, like charango, charango boto. I mean, it was really like something really big, and then the normal charango, which is like a little ukulele.
yeah.
Um, yeah, they were making their own instruments. They were so inventive. So why wouldn't they do that with the guitar-like family of instruments?
Yeah. Yeah, it was a really wonderful experience for me to 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 go to the other side, of
Yeah.
this incredible world of sound,
Hmm.
no? Gabby, where were you from? Where are you from, actually?
Yeah. Well, I am from Berkeley, California. I was born in '72 in this hippie town, and it was my dad liked to say it was hippie, but it wasn't hipster. It was completely different from what it became later. And my dad was a Peace Corps volunteer, and that's how he met my mother. So dad is from the Bronx, really classic Eastern European Jewish background, and his parents and his grandparents all came from the Ukraine, Lithuania, probably from Russia, a generation or two before that. They kept migrating because of various waves of pogroms and kept changing their name because they were servants. So we can't go back very far before the name changes and it's gone. It's gone. And in my mother's heritage is similar in that the each generation was migrating all over the place. So one strand is indigenous. My mother's more indigenous than anything else. Um, but her paternal strand is Chinese. And her father grew up in China. He was born in Peru, but was sent back I believe, as a toddler, and then came back to Peru later and worked um, overseeing some of the mining for a little while, and met my grandmother there. And her heritage is a mix, very mestiza. Indigenous Spanish was. We did a DNA thing, that where you can see what your
Yeah.
heritage is, and it was really fascinating because my mom, there were some Portuguese in there as well, and then a few percentage points of parts of Africa where the Portuguese colonized. So which was completely new to us. We had no idea. My dad was 99.6% Eastern European Jew, which is really funny to see. So they met. My mom was about 17, believe it or not. My dad was like 21. They were so young. They were together a few months. That's it. They said, let's get married. And dad went to school at Berkeley, at Cal. That's why we wound up there. And as a grad student, he could look at buying a house. I mean, that's how inexpensive and curiously worldly. I used to say that if you were to make Ann Arbor a bit grittier and cheaper and not so flush with restaurants, especially in the last 20 years since you and I left, with those kinds of things, it would be similar to Berkeley. So I grew up and more diverse because Berkeley was incredibly diverse in those early days. So I really related, to be honest, more to children that were mixed race, had one person that was an immigrant as a parent and the other person native born in the United States that had heard multiple languages. I related more to those children than I did to the Latinos, because the Latinos around me were of Mexican ancestry. I met one kid at one point later that was like me, half Peruvian and half white, but my girlhood friends were Marquesa was half Black and Japanese. Her parents were teen parents, and Emiliana was half French and Vietnamese. Nyasha, her mom was German born, and her dad was an archbishop of Black man from Zimbabwe. Um, Fernanda was Swiss. Both her parents were Swiss, and they were here for a couple of years. I mean, so my lifestyle. You look at Kamala Harris. I really identify with her kind of upbringing, very international, but born here. And she went to school a few blocks from where I live, you know, in Berkeley. So yeah, that's where I'm originally from. A really interesting time for this interesting city.
Yeah, and you started music when?
Okay,
How did
yeah,
that happen?
so there's a music gene floating around on my dad's side of the family. My grandmother, his mom, was talented, and she was a pianist that could improvise. She had perfect pitch. She was a young woman during the Depression, so there weren't a lot of opportunities then in New York to study, but she still kept this one program where she played at Carnegie Hall as a young woman, I think as part of like a school outreach project, something like that. But apparently her brother, who I was a baby when I met him, was similarly talented, and it went back generations. So there's some vague family folklore about that kind of talent. So it skipped generations. My older brother didn't have it when he started piano lessons. And then when I was a toddler, I was like attracted to the little cheap little spinet. We you know, didn't think about this in lofty ways. We weren't aspiring to be professional. So at the time that I was going to the piano, and there are pictures of me like asleep at the piano and reading comic books at the piano, and I'm little. Um, I they hadn't discovered yet that I have a hearing loss, and I wear hearing aids, and so I couldn't really hear the piano. I mean, it's not a mild loss; it's a high loss. So I could feel the piano though, and at that stage of life, little kids' brains are amazing. You know, they learn languages fast. It's a really good time for them to learn languages, and every day is a miracle in terms of what they're absorbing. So I think I somehow intuited the vibrations into music. And so I was picking up my brother's piano pieces because I would sit nearby or sit against the piano sometimes and listen to the music and then start picking out his pieces. And so my first piano teacher was a neighborhood teacher. She was a refugee from South Africa, and she was a white, soft-spoken Africana woman that studied for a couple of years in London. They were protesting a lot of abuses there towards the Black people of South Africa. It got dangerous for them, so they sold their farm, used that money to buy a small place in Berkeley, because I think they had visited a friend in the late 60s or early 70s. So she stayed my piano teacher until I went to college. And so it was really like mom number two. And
That's great.
but you know, her world was deep, but a little bit narrow. So she loved piano music and she loved art song. And so that was what I was exposed to. And she would bring me to her house often on Sundays and feed me cookies and apple juice. And we would sit and listen to a massive collection of old records. And these were powerful influence. That's it. No TV, no visual, just a little girl, 6, 7, 8 years old, you know, until she went to college, just learning patience and listening to music with all the repeats and listening to all the great pianists, you know, Gilels and Alicia de la Rocha, and of course, Arau and Rubinstein, and these were old cheap records. So I like that crackly sound. I like it when it skips. There's something that's real. I feel like I'm there. It's not this studio and mostly live performances. So to me, music was something very dynamic, very living, and testament to feelings and stories. But her husband, who deeply loved music, very political. I remember him discussing politics with me when I was like 6 or 7. I didn't know what was, but it's amazing. It's an amazing education for a little girl. They were among my earliest white allies, if you can think of it that way. He didn't like music beyond the 1800s, so I didn't even know that there was something living into the 1900s. And I didn't hear my first orchestra work until I was in college. It was really the first time I heard an orchestral work. But the summer before I was about to apply for college, this is in 89, I was 16 and a half, almost 17. needed to round out my college applications with extracurricular activity. And I was doing music, and I was always the musical one. I was improvising, that I got into composing through improvising by myself, not in a group.
Mhm.
And I was scholastically a high achiever. I got mostly really good grades. I was studying Russian. And during the late 80s, this was the time of Gorbachev's
Mhm.
glasnost and perestroika, and the wall came down in 89 and Tiananmen Square happened. And this was the backdrop to my own political awakening. So I thought I was going to study Russian in school and Russian history and with a general probably program in political science. And I was already thinking about law school. This is probably where I was headed, some aspect of this field. I have a feeling that I would have dropped out of law school to become a creative writer at some point because I was interested in writing as well. But, you know, I wasn't looking at music. That's the main point. So I took this music course at the San Francisco Conservatory of Music, which I didn't know existed. I didn't know that this was just across the bay from me. And that changed everything, of course. And I remember the first day going into the old Spanish building, and I met a bunch of other musicians my age. And I was vaguely aware of other kids my age because I would do these sometimes piano recitals with other teachers across the bay, and they're always slightly competitive, and I always acquitted myself well, but I still didn't think of this as a vocation until I saw this school. And I remember coming home and talking to my parents saying, I'm going to be a composer. And I had no idea, none, what that meant. I didn't know any professional musicians. I didn't know what the conservatory was. I didn't understand what music history was or what a master class was or anything. And it's pretty chancy. So that has really deeply affected my views about how I think we do not identify potential talent if it's that chancy. And here I am. I have a good career going now, but I almost wasn't here, which means how many other people should be here? How many other people could be, you know, thriving and contributing to not just our music field, but the public at large, if we identify them in a better way? And I think that if we did, I'm a woman of color, and I'm here only by serendipity, that we would be helping our questions of diversity and bringing in more women if we were more on the outlook for this. So that's how I got in.
It's just as I listen to you, like many questions come into my mind, and I don't want to lose them. The first one, when you mention about listening to your brother playing, and you said that because you have the hearing loss, you learn by vibration. I mean, as a conductor, I would think that the ideal word for us will be to listen the music inside of us, you know, and have the ability to just hear every note inside of us. No, I think that would be the ideal word. That probably it happened with Beethoven, right? So how it was for you then, and how is it for you now in terms of listening through vibration, or just and at the same time I would probably mix both questions. How do you compose now? Do you sit at the piano? Do you need the piano to compose?
Yeah. So when I first got into music, I needed the piano. I'm going to start with that part first. I needed the piano to compose because I was such an improviser, and I actually didn't read or write music that well when I went in as a freshman because my ear was good enough that I could just pick up things quickly. And then the music got more difficult. I couldn't just pick it up in the same way. And that was a first hurdle. Like my pride was wounded. And I got used to my pride being wounded many times, you know, over the course of 11 years when there was more that I could do that I couldn't just pick up, because that was my reality. I was the musical one in the family. I was the one that things came easily, and suddenly things weren't. I had to actually work at it. So the first was if I wanted to compose a string quartet, I mean, I was writing piano music for violin. I was writing violin music with a big piano accent, kind of like you speak Spanish with a big American accent. You know, there was a big piano accent on everything I was writing. And I was like, oh my God, you know, and so I forced myself to start writing away from the piano.
Mm.
And now it's all away from the piano.
Mm.
Occasionally I'll do some MIDI playback, but I get off of it right away because I feel, for me, that there are some issues with MIDI playback that I don't want to absorb. I have tried writing piano music away from the piano. It is so bad. Oh my God. I cannot write piano music away from the piano. I'm so embarrassed. If I need a laugh, I will go and write piano music away from the piano. Then I go to the piano and go, what instrument is this for? Of course I need to do this and I need to do that. And I haven't quite figured out why that is, but my piano music away from the piano it's pianistic, but it doesn't use all the attributes of the piano. Once I get in there, it becomes something super real to me.
Mm.
Then I can really make it a pristine work.
Mm.
As far as the vibration slash sound, because they're really the same thing,
Of course.
is I was doing this more before I got married, but my husband is so talented that I can even do it while we're married if I kind of warn him. I will take off my hearing aids for a few days and just be in silence. And it'll take me a few hours before suddenly I'm in it. And by it, I mean, first of all, it's like deja vu. It's how I remember the beginning of my life. Really, I remember what that was like. And it's going to sound very strange. My vision gets better. Like I just notice things. If something moves across the room, I notice it. But if I have my hearing aids on, I don't. It's like my brain only has so much power, so much bandwidth, and I've got to cut it up. So if I take out sound, suddenly there's more bandwidth that I can lend to other things. That's my theory.
Mm.
And I'm more in it. And then I'm also kind of in a fantasy in my head. You know, I'm not as distracted by the outside world. I'm more internal. I'm a little bit in a dreamy state, and I will compose sometimes from that state. And I think sometimes you come out of a practice session and it takes you about 30 minutes, 45 minutes to just sort of focus, and you're still sort of thinking about the music, or you're in that beautiful landscape of the piece. So I will do that sometimes when I'm really under deadline, or I'll even schedule it and say, okay, I have 3 months before my deadline. So around this period would be a really good time to clear my schedule and just know I'm going to spend several days not hearing anything. And it'll take me a couple days before I'm in that peak magic period. Then I pick what's going to be the first thing that I hear. And what I try and do is cue up something like a piece of music, because it is so sensual. It is so sensory. There's so much sensory information coming in. And I swear to God, I hear like the different strings, the different fibers of the bow on this string, not just like the bow as one surface, but feel the texture. I just, everything comes to life and my brain goes, and I have a lot of ideas that I need to marshal from it. So I think we spend not enough time as composers in school talking about the creative habit, how to set up our brain for really coming up with ideas to make it fertile. And I've been fascinated with that for a very long time, since I started reading all these books on creativity and the psychology of creative people. Starting at Michigan, it was Logan Skelton who first turned me on to some of these writers. And Logan, a wonderful piano teacher and composer who had a huge influence on me, was such a curious kind of spirit and really nerdy in the best possible way. I mean, and very joyful. That I really resonated with that. And so I explored other nerdy and joyful people and picked up habits like that. If they would do something like interrupt their sleep during a certain stage of their sleep, knowing that they're just coming out of REM and they're still kind of dizzy and mesmerized by these images and that story. I've done that. And my brother has done a lot of research in sleep and how that develops your brain. So I think you can have techniques like that. So how that comes into my composing itself, I have a bit of a life cycle to each piece. And so I'll start at the beginning maybe and just kind of go through like what that's like. So Alejandra, you come to me, you say, Gabi, it's been a long time since we worked together. That's the very first stage. It's just the conversation. Mm-hmm. And you say, okay, I want a piece for the 2022-23 season. So I'm like, thank God. Okay, so I can honor my entire life cycle. If it's shorter and I really want to do it, I have to either shorten or cut out some of the phases that I go through. So I know I have 3 years. So what I might do is for a while is it's just in the back of my head. And you're telling me it's for a youth orchestra. So over the next few months, maybe even year, I just go catch a few concerts with children. Maybe it's children playing, or it's about children's voices, or I'm just sort of bringing it into my life. I'm not trying too hard, but I just need to breathe it in like oxygen constantly in little bits and pieces. And I just know that's what I need to do. So that's the first part. It just becomes part of my life. The second part is I'm a little more active and I start casually. There's no time pressure. Remember, I have other pieces I might be working on, and I'm in different parts of the life cycle for multiple works. Yeah. So this next stage, I might read some books, and I'm starting to think about what are the kids going to want to, what story do they want to tell? And if they're from Chile, I might read something about Latin America, or maybe not. I'm trying to get a sense, what would make sense. The next part, I'm starting to put music down on a page, but I have no idea if I'm going to use it or not. It may not even go into this piece. And it may be the beginning, it may be the end, it may be one moment, but I'm starting to produce. The next stage, I'm getting closer to the deadline. I'm starting to pick and choose the best ideas because I have a lot of material I'm going through, and I'm turning them into things. I still don't really know where they go, but it's like building a fire. You add twigs and you blow on it and it's getting bigger and bigger. And the best ones are the ones that I pick, and they're the ones that I can connect together into a real piece. The order is starting to shape itself. The next phase is I'm really making choices. I'm polishing, I'm putting things in. The final stage is editing, make sure I got all my dynamics make sense. I'm not promiscuous with switching in and out of different dynamics. There's a consistent language and harmonics are in. When I'm really zeroing in, I can still fix the orchestration. Like if I can, I take a break between this stage and the one before. Kind of like when you learn a piece of music, if you can take a few months off and go back to it, you can do so much more with it as a player. You see so much as a conductor. That's the same with composing. If you really plan out your time well, and we generally are not taught this way. And so I borrowed a lot from the way creative writers work and the way performers learn a piece of music. So I benefited from piano lessons and seeing how that happened. But my dad's a Mark Twain scholar now. And so the world of writing is something that I've always been aware of, and how writers start very generally. They keep a notebook, they write things down. And I think composers are a little bit of performers and a little bit of creative writers. But we don't talk about the creative habit of how to do that. Yeah. And that's just the general plan. And then the final is I turn in a piece. I turn in a piece to you, and the last phase is the collaborative aspect. And sometimes the collaborative aspect can come in if you get a reading of the work in progress at some point during, that's just a scheduling thing. And you may have to switch up the order a little bit, but that has helped keep me out of trouble as much as possible, with deadlines, running out of ideas. And that's the general picture. And then there are the smaller things you do to come up with the ideas. And I lament the fact that for a performer, your program is so rigorous. So you're required to do orchestra a few times a week. You have studio class, you have department class, chamber music class. There's a chamber group you're probably in that you're required to do. And in addition to your lessons. On top of that, you may play composers' pieces and whatnot. Composers, we get the private lesson the way you do, and we get comp seminar, and that's it. There is no I mean, so the opportunities for you to grow are built into the curriculum, but we don't get orchestra 3 times a week where we have to write for an orchestra and hear something 3 times a week. We don't normally get a studio class with just our teacher. We get a general comp seminar with all the composers. There is no chamber music 3 times a week with our group and a coaching. We don't get that. So it's, and then the lesson itself, it would be like, Alejandra, if you went in with Paul Cantor and Paul put down his violin and you put down your violin on the desk, okay, on the table, and you get out your score and you put it on the stand, okay? And you talk about the Ponce. I remember we played Ponce, right, on your doctoral recital, right? We did all Latin American composers. And you talk about it, okay? You're gonna switch to the A string over here, and you're gonna go into second position over here, and then you're gonna set it, you're gonna do the fermata, and then you're gonna vib a little more. And that's it. You don't actually ever pick up your violins. You just talk about what you're gonna do, okay? So imagine that lesson. You just talk about it, and Paul says, good, go do that, practice that. That's a composition lesson. We bring up the scores, and we talk about it. We don't hear any of it. And there's nobody, no violinist there to bring the work to life. And it's, to me, it's kind of amazing that we graduate any composer at all. We're largely left to our own devices to create performances. And we don't explore the habit as much as we could if there was more support for teachers to incorporate performers and performances of their composers' work and to provide more opportunities. And yes, that would mean upending a lot of the conservatory ways of doing things and training. But, you know, we've been asking that question anyway, that we've been training people for the 1800s for so long, and classical music has not been preparing musicians for 2020. This world is so different. When I go and guest at the conservatories and music departments, I feel like I'm back in school again when you and I were there in the 90s, because I hear the same pieces of music, the same textbooks, the same posters on the hallways for the same competitions. I'm like, my God, it's been 30 years. And now that I'm in this world and largely thriving in it, so much, yeah, there were fundamentals that were laid in place, but there was such a huge leap to land here that a lot of composers don't have the viable and really vibrant career they could, and they could contribute much more if we grasp these issues. And I think we're feeling it now, that people are now starting to question why they need to go to music school if for a fraction of the tuition, they can get private lessons with that amazing teacher and then try and build their community else, you know, in other ways. We've been thinking a lot about that during the pandemic, is how you're doing this, you know, and connecting us in different ways. So the way I compose, I think, is a direct reflection. You're asking that question. That's why I'm talking at length about this, but the way I compose reflects what I did and didn't receive at 2 eminent institutions, Rice and Michigan.
It's interesting to hear you because I'm thinking about also as a conductor, no? Because how you approach the score, no? And for me, so interesting to hear you, no? Your own process, creative process. But at the same time, there's also the issue of the conductor of being a performer, because at the end, I think at the end, this is the most essential part, because you have to make sure that the musicians play the way you want to hear it, no? And somehow you need the tools of being a performer, no? And the experience of being a performer. You know, certain things that, you know, I always say to myself, the ideal orchestra probably will be the one that you don't have to say anything, because they're such an incredible performers that the little things that we do as performers, how do you explain them, no? and put it in a context that is musical, you know? If I don't know if I'm clear with this, but it's interesting for me to hear that from the composer's perspective, no? And when you mention about going into a composing a lesson, and and just talk about music, which is I think is wonderful too, no? But the actual action that makes the music alive is missing, no?
It's missing, and I mean, largely missing. And I think so when I would go in for my lesson with Logan Skelton, there are 2 pianos in his room. So he would direct my hands. He would come over and say, no, try this fingering. And then he would say, hop up for a second. That was something he always said, hop up for a second. And then he would show me and then say, okay, now you try it. And of course I wouldn't do it very well, but the idea is I would practice for a week afterwards and be able to do it. Or we would play together and you say, try this, try that, and work on this. And I remember him even playing on my arm when he wanted me to have a lighter technique. He said, I want you to feel like that on the keys. And so there is piano music happening. There is piano music being performed. You demonstrate through your words and through the music. And then he'll say, okay, that retard was clumsy. Do it again. And so I would try and slow down more smoothly and make it more convincing. Why can't we compose side by side? I've done it. It's fun. You get a young person and you say, okay, so let's start with this note and I want you to arrive at this note. And I want you to give me 5 different ways of getting there and you have 10 minutes and I'm going to do it with you. And you don't have to flesh out every single note. Don't get too hung up. You can just say something A major-y and then say, and just kind of put some black. If you just know it's like a chord, you'll work it out later. But, come up with different ways of getting it and put in some dynamics and shapes. But I want 5. So you have about 2 minutes on each one. All right. And you can see this. It's awesome. You see this terror, right? First, just like, because they don't know me. And so like, oh my God, this person's mean, right? But then I'm doing it also. And I'm like smiling and suddenly it's fun. So it's very important to bring into composing the idea of joy and discovery. There's so much shame in our business. We're ashamed to get out of tune. We're ashamed to hit the wrong note. We're ashamed that it's not profundo and deep, and there's so much shaming that it cuts off the creative flow. You can always get rid of it. And you can be very demanding and very discriminating about the quality of the music, but not at this early process just yet. And especially with somebody so young that is so product oriented, that everything they put down has to be in the piece. We should be able to feel like that we are so fertile as creative beings that we can throw away things, we can reserve things. I've reserved so much material that I said, there's potential here. I'm not good enough as a composer, so I'm not going to use it. I'm going to keep working at it. And it's going to be homeless for a while until some piece comes in 10 years, I can finally pour it in there. And you want to rethink how you work, that you can generate a lot of material, keep it in binders. So I start introducing that idea because I'm composing side by side with a young person. And when they see all this music, a whole page of music that just comes out. And I said, see? So what I want you to do is do versions of this, where if you have a problem, just say, stop. Maybe you don't even write anything down. You just talk about it first to yourself. Okay, 10 different ways that I could do this or that, Then if you look at a great piece of music, say, what were the 8 other alternatives that Beethoven had, or Mahler had, or Bartok had, or Chen Yi, or anybody else had? You have to try and get away from the product and look at the process, the journey of creativity that got there. And once you do that, and you show how it's done, you start looking at the habit of composing, and it's modeled. I'm creating this way of teaching composers that is directly from my experiences as a pianist and my experience doing some writing, but also knowing something about how writers work. I think composers would benefit a lot from reading interviews of creative people online. They can be inventors, they can be sculptors, they can be writers, they can be cooks, about how they discover. They go live in another country for a while, pick up new techniques. And the cuisine of Peru has really been innovated that way, over recent years, and going abroad and bringing it back. And the food becomes more Andean in a really strange sense rather than less. And that's your goal, is that by infusing your habit, that it's not going to be as much of a chore. You will have the facility and skill set to tell many stories, and it's ongoing. it is limitless how far you can go with keep adding to your toolkit. Now, I sound really articulate as if I'm super disciplined about all of this. Life gets in the way,
Absolutely.
and it, yeah.
And actually, that was my next question was, what do you ever, while in the process of composing, do you ever feel yourself being mechanical? And what do you do if that happens to break that?
Mechanical is okay. Yeah. Yes. You're not always going to be inspired, but the mechanical can be a first rollout of an idea. It can be a good first rollout. And you can go back when you're not exhausted by that idea and go to something else that you might be more interested in working on. Sometimes you're just marking the bench and say, okay, I've got to transition. I'm just going to do, I'm just going to like retard. And I'm not going to help out the performer. I'm just going to put retardando. You figure it out, and that's it, right?
Yeah.
And you go back and you say, you know what? I think I should bleed out this performer. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. And you help the performer achieve a good transition through retardando. And in the process, you discover some cool thing. That's so cool. I'm going to do it everywhere. And you put it everywhere in a piece and you put it everywhere. But then for the landscape of its new appearance, you change that gesture. So mechanical is not a bad idea. It's not a bad thing. And it can just be temporary. The other thing also is that sometimes your second or third best is pretty damn good. That just because it wasn't internally feeling as inspired doesn't mean that the performer won't put the magic in. That they'll be inspired. I mean, that's a different psyche. It's not your psyche. You got to allow room for somebody else to find beauty and in your piece. And that took me time. It took me several experiences where I was surprised. I thought a piece was not a good piece. And I felt guilty. I felt ashamed. There's the shame thing. I felt ashamed to hand over something. And I had to stop myself from apologizing as I handed it over. And then the performer played it so beautifully and found so much in it. I felt like I couldn't take credit. And I felt a little private shame. But I'm ashamed. But they would find, privately their own way in. So you have to look at the whole mechanical side of things with a more nuanced eye. Yeah.
Because sometimes I think when I find myself studying or practicing in a mechanical way, I said, like I feel like I need to do something, no? But it's good to at least observe what you're doing mechanical and probably then do something about it. Yesterday or 2 days ago, I heard an interview of Isabel Allende, who is a Chilean writer, very famous. Actually, she lives in California too, I think. And one of the things that she said, that she mentioned, is that she sits in front of a computer every day for a number of hours to write. And she says, probably 90% of that writing, I'm not going to use it. Yes, but I like the idea of doing it every day, because it gives me a sense of, I guess, security too, no? The fact that you are doing it every day, discipline. How do you feel about that? Do you share that view?
Not quite. And it took me a long time to realize that I needed time off. And even when life is going more smoothly and I could do it every day, I'd rather do something else creative. And I think for me, what has really worked is like going into my kitchen and just cooking all day and doing something and learning. The people that know me know that I've been fascinated with like making cheese and fermenting vegetables, making my own honey mead. I mean, all these kind of old farmstead skills. And then I compose up a storm after I do something like that. There's something so gratifying about that work. So I usually do something creative every day, but it may not be composing. That said, if I'm not composing regularly, at least a few times a week, I'm off my rhythm, and that happens a lot. I'm off my rhythm. It happened in a big way here in California because of the fires, and we live in a rural area. I have 2 properties here, 2 mortgages on a freelance income. It's kind of scary, but we're swinging it so far. We've gone to the store very little since the pandemic hit because we were growing our own food, a lot of it, chickens, and I think we have about 18 acres of land between the 2 on a mountainside. So with the fires not coming close to us, that have been hugely disruptive, and we've been mentally learning to embrace fire and live with it. It is a lifestyle now. So it takes a lot of time where I'm out bringing in wood and chopping wood and chipping and doing all these things I never thought I was gonna do and get in with the land. And so then this year, of course, has been such a unbelievable year for all of us, and the whole planet has been caught in the vice of the pandemic and switching over. Then, I started this academy for emerging composers in 2017, the first year of Trump's presidency. And I remember I had no plans of starting an academy. I thought we would have goats by now, and other animals by now. And instead I said, no, no goats, more composers. And because it seemed like very suddenly during the election of 2016, when this was happening, I just was thinking, I have to do something. I have to do something. And the academy came together so quickly. I had no plans of starting a nonprofit, but it was kind of a desperate move on my part and the most un-Trump-like thing I could think of to do. And it just blew up. It turned into this really big thing. We're young. We're about as old as an undergraduate degree. We're just finishing our 4th year in this past year during a pandemic. We've had a fair amount of success, running on a shoestring budget still. And it's taken a lot of time. And I'm hoping to move into this next phase now where my staff is awesome. I have just incredible staff that will free me up to get back on a more regular rhythm. And even then, it would not be Allende's habit of every day. I have a slightly different rhythm.
Yeah. No, it happens to me too. Like you said too. Like I need to do other things too. That keeps me creative. No.
Yeah.
It's interesting to see and to read how everyone works so differently. No. Gabby, I have 5 minutes before the conversation is over, and I would like to ask you a question that probably is interesting to you, which is what does silence mean to you?
Boy, silence to me is not hearing anything, and that's something that I've used to my benefit. It's a creative time. It's a time where I'm not talking myself to death. I talk to myself a lot. And a lot of things I should get done. Instead, I just kind of rest and see what rises to the surface. Like when I'm literally in silence for a few days, it's such a fertile time because I'm not taking in unnecessary information or talking to myself. It's almost a meditative state is when I can be creative. After I come out of that, I'm not silent at all. So silence invites its opposite, I believe, in my case. So it's not a scary thing to me at all. I lived for many years in solitude without a partner, and it was absolutely, totally fine. And then I would go sometimes weeks without seeing anybody other than my parents, and they knew my mom knows how to talk in such a way that I can lip read her and not have to hear things. So I have a very literal, I think, definition and meaning for silence since it's been a constant in my life.
It's interesting that probably the only, how to say in English, sentido that we cannot turn off is the ears for
Yeah.
us, you know? Because I wish sometimes I didn't want to hear all the noise outside, no? That you just do like this thing, just like you do what we do with the eyes, no?
Yeah, you know, I've had to fight with some of the hearing aid technicians that I work with now, because hearing aids have changed a lot. When I was growing up, they were analogs, and especially in the 80s, the sound was very good, really nice analog hearing aids. Then in the 90s, while I was at Michigan, they went digital, most of them. I hated them. And the first digital hearing aids were really bad. They changed the pitch, first of all, for music, and they were really mechanical. And also, hearing aids are mostly geared for people that have lost their hearing later in life, and people that could hear perfectly well. And what people most miss if you lose your hearing in life is speech. And speech, like and being able to communicate with your partner, are high frequencies, where music wants the body of the sounds. They're going to be mid to low frequencies. And I don't hear the high frequencies as well as I hear the low frequencies. So all of these things that digital hearing aids were privileging, I just hated. And it was very difficult for me to go through those phases. So one of the things that they have been trying to do is there's no off switch on the hearing aid anymore. And I said, oh no, that's not happening. You don't understand. That's fine for somebody that has gone through their life that way. But for those of us that are my age, who grew up where it is absolutely natural for us to live in silence, and to have a choice that I can pop out my hearing aids, I can turn it off and go to this very familiar space. So I had to really fight my technicians and say, look, the pitch is changing. I know there's supposed to be bass here. You're playing me a piece of music. I know that's Haydn. I don't hear the cello. So all the bass is missing. I can tell them these things that are, and I could be very annoying, in that way. There's another hearing aid company that I've been working with that wants to address hearing loss in musicians. Can you imagine? And so I've been a really good guinea pig for them also, because not only is my hearing loss, from birth, but it's also a very flat loss. So I'm very easy to correct, and in a certain sense, other than my being, demanding about the quality of the sound, but it's just flat. Whereas people that lose their hearing later, it's like this and different from person to person. So they can be very hard to custom fit in that way. And they don't lip read well, it's a new habit for them, and it's hard to make the switch. And again, shame. There's so much shaming from musicians that lose their hearing loss. Well, I've never felt that shame. So I'm very vocal. I don't hide it. I say, okay, I'll try this, I'll try that. But there is a real market. And I've been telling this company, saying, if you can reach these musicians and without any shame, address hearing loss and be ready for a complicated language from them about their needs. And we don't want stuff mucked with. When you hear a CD and the engineer's like gone crazy and they've added this and added that and added that, we want as pure a sound as possible on our instrument. Where hearing aids go and they massage every part of the sound, and they do things, and I don't like that. And I said, I just want volume. I don't want you to make it 5-dimensional. I don't want you to like hide in the highs. I don't care about the Bluetooth. All that takes bandwidth. I just want volume. I've got everything else, So, yeah.
Gabby, Thomas Gregory is watching us. He says, hi, Gabby.
Hi, Tomasito. I miss you.
Well, Gabby, we have come to the end of the hour, and thank you so much for being with me this afternoon, morning for you, and sharing your experience as a musician, but also as a human being. And for me, of course, especially interesting to get to know you even better that I actually know you, and also recalling all the beautiful memories that we had together, making music together. So thank you so much for being here this morning, and thank you everyone for being with us this morning by Facebook, and I hope you enjoyed it, and I'm so looking forward for our last conversation of the year, and thank you again for being with us. So thank you, Gabi.
Thank you, Ale.
And I wish you always the best.
Likewise.
Bye-bye.
Bye.